JPEG in the final place where they go through bags by hand, and it fell out. And it had all the information inside to call us, but they didn't do it. But our guide took care of it.
Pretty lucky. Yeah.
Yeah. An
How many
expo.
COVID tests did you have to have on this trip?
Pardon?
How many COVID tests did you have to have on this trip?
How many COVID tests, Joyce?
2.
Well, we had to have one to get into Dubai.
No. To Abu Dhabi.
Oh, we had to have one to go to Abu Dhabi
And then one to come home.
and then one to come home.
Oh, they didn't require it for Dubai?
Require it for Dubai?
No,
No.
Wow.
fully vaccinated.
Yeah, we're fully
They have
vaccinated.
to be fully vaccinated.
Yeah. Had to be fully vaccinated. We had our cards, our whatever
QR code.
QR code and everything.
Okay, well, we're going to get started here. It's a couple minutes after 10. It took me a little longer to get the YouTube started, so. But welcome everybody to Digital Forum on a really cold, windy Saturday morning. Good time to be sitting behind your computer instead of sitting outside in this cold. We're getting snow flurries here, so hopefully it's going to get better in the next few days or weeks. I'll do one last call for anybody that wants to join the panel. Just raise your Zoom hand and we'll bring you on in. Otherwise, we're going to get started right away. I'm hoping, I haven't seen her, she'll pop up as a panelist. Jennifer Renwick is our second hour speaker. I've emailed her. I haven't heard back from her, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that she has it on her calendar and said she'll be here. So hopefully everything will go well. She's out west in Colorado, so it's always hard to know where she is and whether she has a decent internet connection. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that she shows up at 11. With that, I've got a couple of questions that Kathy Brand sent me, and I'm hoping I don't know the answers to, so hopefully maybe somebody in the group does. It's about Google Photos. Kathy can't figure out how to get them to her desktop. All she's getting are small-sized files, and she needs the full-size files on to put into the newsletter that she's putting out. So does anybody work with Google Photos? I looked at it and I really wasn't too sure. Oh boy, and all I hear is silence. So, I looked at, I had a few, I was surprised I had some photos in Google Photos, but I could download from it, and it looked like if you click the download original, you would probably get the full-size files. I don't do much with Google and Google Docs, so so I guess, well, we don't seem, let me see. Maybe, looks like maybe Barry might. Let me bring Barry in and see.
The question, I don't know exactly what the question is, but when you open up Google Photos on an iMac, you can pick the photo and then just slide it over to your screen. And then once it slides over to the screen, you can open up in Photoshop. I don't know if that's the question.
Oh, okay.
I just did it. I just did it now myself again, but that's how you do it. So it opens up as a JPEG.
It opens up as a JPEG, so all she has to do is drag it from that window onto her desktop.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I have done, and it worked for me. So, may not work depending on the system she has and the updates.
Well, she's got an iMac too, so actually, I think she's got the same iMac as you have. So, so no, that's great because I never tried that. I should have thought about that.
Yeah, and then if that works, then the images have to be sharpened quite a bit, and they're not very large, but at least you can work with them.
Yeah, yeah. So, and here I see Kathy's here too, so she can. Yeah, I just don't work with Google that deep. There are some things that we're going to talk about with Google one of these days. So,
Okay. Well, I hope it works.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks, Barry. That's
Welcome.
That'll be helpful. And Kathy, I don't know if you're here, if you heard that. I know she could be in the process of coming in too.
Yeah, if I see Ray Pick has something in the chat there.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that. Yeah, Ray, we can get to yours too. So, hey, Kathy.
Yeah, thanks for all the advice. I think the person who sent it to me had a low resolution file because when I did drag them to the desktop and they weren't suitable for printing. And what I want to do is put them in the newsletter.
Right. So, yeah, then you probably have to have her send you
higher resolution, huh?
Higher resolution.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that it's working though, that I did the right thing. It was just the way she sent them to me.
Yeah. That's always the trick. Then you had a question about PDFs.
Yeah. What was the question? Let me find it.
Yeah, you have two different.
I know what it is. In the past, I would, if I made an email, I wanted to print it, or received an email, I wanted to print it, it would go to the print dialog box and it would print it. But lately it's been going to this Adobe Acrobat reader. And yes, they have a place where you can print on both sides. And I tried to make that a permanent option and it doesn't work. So a lot of times I forget to add it and it prints on 2 sheets of paper.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because I'm just looking at mine, the app Acrobat. Now I don't use the reader, so maybe I'm using the full version of Acrobat.
Oh, where you pay for it?
Yeah, I pay for it in my subscription. And it does stay permanent on print on both sides. Well, not permanent. It doesn't always do it. So I have a regular routine of going through. I go through the whole dialog box as my routine, and to make sure that both sides is set, that it's flipped on the long edge so that it fits on the paper.
Yeah, I'll probably have to do that then.
Yeah, but it will change depending whether you use the reader's print section, because it's got a few more setups in it. You could try going, there is a printer section at the bottom that you can open up.
Okay.
And that has a lot of the same info. And a lot of times, if you go in there and set everything the way you want it and hit print, it keeps that dialog box the same.
Oh, okay.
And so then it sort of locks it in a little bit more.
You
can try that.
Yeah, the other thing you could try is making Finder her default, or Preview her default view for PDFs.
Make what?
Preview your default PDF reader instead of Acrobat.
Oh, Preview, make that, okay.
Oh, yeah, it does a really nice job with PDFs, and then you can set your printer parameters really easily there.
Okay, that's good. And then is there a difference in size of documents? Because I haven't researched it that much, but I would usually want the lower
Well, I think no matter which program you're going to open, it's going to open as whatever resolution, but that's where I sent you that link to that PDF, what do they call it?
okay.
A PDF compressor website. And if you need to get a lower res, just drag it into that and just resize it real quick. It'll dump it into your downloads folder and just open it.
Okay. All right, give me
Yeah,
something to go on.
That would probably be a good way to do it, because that preview does work pretty nice on Apple over the Adobe Acrobat reader. And for me, I'm using the full version of Acrobat, so I can edit and do all that stuff right in it. But
Okay,
yeah. Okay. So
Can
that
I just
takes
add,
care of-
can I just add to Kathy? I took the image that I transferred over and I just sharpened it quite a bit, and it does come out pretty well.
in Photoshop?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
good luck,
So
good luck.
that would probably be, depending on how small a size file it is, Kathy, you could enlarge it in Photoshop to a point, but
Well, I want these pictures for the newsletter,
Yeah.
for the PSA Wisconsin chapter.
yeah, so you
And,
need the 2100 pixels.
Well, I think they're gonna be kind of small I'm gonna put like 6 to a page.
Oh, okay.
So maybe I'll get away with it then.
Yeah, you might be able to. Okay. I think that took care of all your questions.
Yes,
So,
yes.
let's see. So, Ray Pan, you had, you're here on the panel, aren't you? I thought I brought you in. Yeah, we got a big group today, so it's hard to find everybody. Ray, are you here? Raise your Zoom hand if you are, and I can make sure I bring you in. No, I'm not hearing him or seeing him. Marty,
Yeah,
you don't see him.
No, I don't see his name on the list either. Yeah, the attendees.
Yeah,
had
he was
the
there.
start. Yeah,
He was in earlier, and then he showed a picture. He wanted to get some some response on what we thought of it, and then I think you did your normal. I don't know how he was able to even to screen share, Jeff, without you giving him authorization, but he did do a screen share and showed.
Yeah,
his
he
photo.
did do a screen share, and I turned it off so that we could get started. Maybe it kicked his system out like it did for Jason. Sometimes that stopping screen share messes people up. So hopefully he'll come back, and because I don't even see him in the list, and be happy to discuss with him.
yeah, he had to step out real quick. It looked like he had to take a picture for a robot thing or something, competition or something like that. So I guess he had to step out real quick to take care of that, and then
Okay.
he'll be back.
Yeah.
I saw that in the news today that there's a robot competition downtown Milwaukee with
Neat.
hundreds of schools participating. So maybe it's
Huh.
down there.
Yeah.
Whereabouts is
Okay.
that, Ken? Whereabouts is it? Do you know?
I don't know if it's in if it's in the Wisconsin Center, or if it's in one of the other smaller,
Okay.
but it's downtown Milwaukee is what I thought of. And they
Okay,
had
okay.
a nice, Channel 12 had a nice news part of their news program on it.
Okay, we can look it up. Thanks, though. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Jeff, I think Pat Lynch has got something he wants to ask. I've been chatting back and forth with him here, but I think he's got something that.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
Okay. It's about, well, what happened, I'll tell you what happened. My iMac drive went, and I ended up taking apart my iMac and putting in a new SD just to get it going again. And I got it all set up and it's working again. You might ask how I got the screen off. Well, I YouTubed that, and you can actually cut them off.
Yeah,
with
that's
the
a
razor.
messy
It worked out
job.
pretty good. It worked out pretty good because I even got the tape to put it back together. So it turned out real well. But my question is I started looking into the new equipment on Apple, and I see we have a Mac Mini and we have a Mac Studio. Now, there's a big dollar difference between the Studio versus the Mac Mini. Now, when I take photos, I probably do what a lot of other people here do is maybe 500 to 1,000 photos, bring them into Lightroom, do what I'm going to do in Lightroom, maybe occasionally Photoshop back and forth and then export. So really what my question is a high high-end Mac Mini good enough to do all of that kind of stuff, or a low-end Mac Studio? Does anybody have any experience with the Mac Mini or Studio?
Jeff uses the Mac Mini, so
I use a Mac Mini. If you could probably do just about anything you wanted with a Mac Mini with 16 gigabytes of RAM and 1 terabyte solid state hard drive. Going to the Studio, what you really gain in the Studio is if you stay with the Macs, it's just sort of an upgraded Mac Mini, but you have extra ports on it. You have 4 Thunderbolt ports on the back, 2 USB-C ports on the front, a card reader on the front, which I think is a little useless, but some people like it. An HDMI port on the back to hook a monitor up. You could actually hook up to 4 monitors with a Mac, a Studio over a Mini, where you can only do 2 monitors with a Mini. And the Mini only has a couple of USB-C ports, and actually USB 3 port, a couple USB-Cs, or 1 USB-C, 1 Thunderbolt port, and an HDMI port. So your ports are a big problem with the Mac Mini. The Studio has more. I don't think it's worth going to the Max that or the Ultra that they have. The Max is sort of twice as fast as the Mac Mini would be. So the low-end Mac Studio is a lower is faster than the Mac Mini would be. So they all just sort of grade up. I haven't seen or touched a Mac Studio yet.
Okay.
So it is going to replace my laptop, but I'll probably get the Studio Max, either fully loaded or the bottom end of the Studio with the Ultra in it. Just because I do videos and that would work better for videos. If you're doing stills, I think you could get away with the Studio for, the base Studio setup.
yeah, I think you're right, Jeff. I think that the higher end one is really designed for doing a lot of video work or really hardcore graphic work, that kind of thing. I think that's where it excel, but I think you're probably right in that for photography itself, I don't think you have to go quite that extensive with it. Unless you want to spend $8,000,
Yeah.
One of the things I was looking at is the Mac Studio myself. And I wanted to save some money and I didn't want to buy another monitor. I noticed you had said you'd fixed an iMac, I think. The iMacs, as far as I understand, what I talked to some of the people there, you can use that as a dummy monitor. So you don't necessarily need to buy another monitor. You can use your iMac as your monitor. And then I asked, can I do the same thing with my iPod Air, which I'm on now? Then I would have access to all of my files on a day like today. If we said, oh, let's demonstrate something, I could do that with the files from the Studio. They're telling me, yes, that's possible too. So there's a lot of more versatility in the Studio, it sounds like to me. So it might save you some money if you don't have to buy a monitor.
Well, I like that. How would you hook up that monitor?
They sent me an email, and if Jeff will send me your email later, I'll send you the link that they sent me, and they explain how to do it. Now, it was with my particular year because my iMac is about almost 9 years old now, and it's doing great, but I think it's time to move it up.
Yeah.
But anyway, they said there were instructions in there on how to do that.
Okay.
Is it just connected through the USB cable?
I haven't gone through all that yet, but I believe so. I think you just connect it from the 2 Studio as if it's going to be a monitor, but it will see it as a dummy monitor rather than a computer.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Now that would
Yeah.
really save some money. I mean, that's a nice way to go because right away you save over $1,000. You know,
Well, more than
so,
that. You could pay $1,500 to $1,800 with the Mac stuff,
right.
depending upon what kind
Yeah,
of screen
and
you want.
I looked at their new screen and I'm not that impressed, and actually I'm hearing mediocre reviews on that screen. So to be honest, if I get the Studio, I'm just going to stay with my LG screens that I have, and it's just going to replace my laptop because for some reason my laptop, and it's only 2 years old, is running a little funky at times. So, and when I'm doing all this Zoom stuff, it's be nice to have a little more power behind it. So I'll probably upgrade to
Yeah.
but I'm just going to go to the Studio Max and not the Ultra. Although I get tempted to do the low-end Ultra just to get all the Thunderbolt ports that are on it, because then you get 2 more Thunderbolt ports.
Hey,
It's
Jim,
interesting architecture.
Jim, I sent you my email address in chat.
Okay, let me pick that up and then I'll send this stuff to you later.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. We
I
got
have a-
Rick Hawthorne had a question. He works in Lightroom on a BenQ monitor using Adobe RGB to do his editing. When I decide to send them out to print to like Costco, etc., should I send them in regular sRGB or do all my editing with my monitor in sRGB to see the true results?
My first question on that, Jeff, is are they still allowing printing at Costco? And if so, he should ask them which format, which color format they would prefer for their printers.
Yeah, they're still. I think they're still printing at Costco. Ken just used them. That was a year ago, wasn't it?
I think I heard them announce that they're not printing anymore. And when I went in the one here in New Berlin, I think their counter for printing was gone. And I thought that was true for all Costco's, but I might be wrong.
Yeah.
They may be printing online now, Jeff.
Yeah, I think they're just doing it online. I think they got rid of their labs in there. So I think that is maybe what happened. So, but in general, I would say that whenever you send a print out to a lab, Costco, Walgreens, any of those places, you want to send it as an sRGB. It's fine to edit in Adobe RGB because you get the bigger color range, and if you print with some of the newer printers, you can take advantage of the Adobe RGB color space over the sRGB because it's a little more limited.
But if the newer printers are doing Adobe RGB, and if you send them sRGB, you're losing some of your color. And so you might want to find out first what their printers are able to print in.
Yeah. Usually Walgreens and Costco are generally printing in sRGB. As far as I know, but
or any of those, I mean, they did just start relatively recently accepting Adobe RGB as well, but almost all of them are set up for sRGB when you go with commercial printing.
Yeah, they don't want to fool with that extra color space as much because most people aren't working in it, so it's more of a problem. And then you get less surprises this way if you do it. But I work in Pro Photo, and then I just downsize it depending what I need. Let's see, we got a couple of things in the chat just to keep up. Paul Mortal said it's at UWM Panther Arena for that robotics competition. And Ramona sent a link, put a link in for it. So everybody can check that out. That could be interesting. Jim, go ahead and talk about ClickOn right away.
Okay. I think if you look at the newsletter that came out, you'll see a little section on ClickOn. 3 years ago, people in Chicago, these were pretty much photographers that were working in the industry, decided to get together to put together a convention in Chicago that would talk about taking pictures of people, but it also started as having a lot of information about just general photography. So they had that during the first year, and it was very interesting, and I really enjoyed it an awful lot. They then were going to have a second one, and of course, COVID came up. They had to cancel that. They went to a second one the year after that, where they seemed to center more on taking pictures of people. And what I noticed when I was there, that the group of people in the audience were anywhere from very, very new at taking pictures of people to people who were working taking pictures of people. And they bring instructors in for a 3-day conference for the normal conference, but then you can take an extra day if you wish. That's very in-depth with someone. And along the way, they do things like photo walks. They bring in models that you get to photograph when you're there. And they also have the ability for you to, if you come with a couple of people and you wish, you can even check out your own model, and they will work with you at night after the classes, and you can take pictures of them. Again, they have photo walks at night, and the instructors that they bring in really vary quite a bit depending on the year. But they've had, for instance, Lindsay Adler was there the first year. Many of you know her. She's pretty well known in the field. Joel Grimes was there. He's the guy that does a ton of commercial shoots. And we went out and took pictures of models with him. Last year, Robert Lim was there. He does a lot of wedding photography, but he's really good at seeing light and being able to take you out and show you how to just have someone stand in the right place and get great pictures. So if you are someone who is thinking about learning how to take pictures of people or do a better job of pictures of people than what you're doing currently, this is a really great place to get some tips. In fact, one of the ones that Robert Lim showed us was how to use just basically a basic umbrella with just a flash and take it out on, the street or whatever, and you get some absolutely stunning photos. So there were a lot of things he showed us, and other instructors do different things. Some were for just no flash, just come out and how to pose people. Then there were classes on posing and so on. Anyway, if you're interested, there is a little section in the newspaper about that. And ClickOn was very generous to give us a discount of $100. Normally it's $299 for the 3 days, but they take $100 off if you use the code. And in addition to that, they have reduced rates for the Palmer Hotel where this takes place. And the Palmer Hotel normally does not allow photography, but during this particular time, they open up the entire hotel for photos. So you can take people anywhere and get photos. And the other thing I think you'll see is I mentioned in there, they also will have a trade show. Many of the major manufacturers are coming in, and they're usually pretty good with discounts and so on. And during the trade show, they set up about 10, or at least I think last time was probably 10 or 15 shooting bays where they brought models in all during the day for you to take pictures of. They set up things like flashes and stuff for you to use. So all you had to do was take their triggers, put them on your camera, and you could take all the pictures you wanted. Those pictures are yours. So anyways, it's it's an interesting place to go if that's the kind of photography you're looking to work with. So I hope that sums it up.
Yeah, sounds good.
Well,
There's
I
a
should
lot
say,
of different ones coming back, so.
I should just say it's June 21st through the 23rd. So it is coming up, this summer. So it'll be a nice time to go outside. They'll be able to take us outside again and take pictures of models out. It's half a block away or a block away from the parks along the lake there. So that fountain is right there. I mean, all kinds of things are right there to take photos of.
Wow, okay. Well, that's good. Sounds interesting. So it's in the newsletter that just got sent out this morning. So you'll see it in there, along with a bunch of stuff on latest Wacko competition for those of you that are in the Wacko Camera Club. So check out the newsletter. Okay, the next thing, Brian, you've got a problem with battery? With the Nikon
Well, I think
battery?
I solved it in the meantime, but it's kind of interesting. I mean, I took my Z50 battery and I was charging it overnight. I'd used it just a little bit yesterday. And this morning the charger light was still flashing. So normally that would go steady state whenever it is fully charged, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I put the battery then in the camera, and then next to the battery symbol was a question mark, which I'd never seen before on any of my Nikon cameras. And I pressed it, and it said the lighting conditions are too dark. And I thought, what does that have to do with the battery?
Yeah.
And I suddenly realized then that actually went into my information panel, and I had set the flash to be on based upon some work I did yesterday. I never did use the flash yesterday, but anyway, went back and reset it to the flash to be off, and then the question mark went away.
Oh.
Interesting. It was like kind of a red herring. So I don't know why when I look at the back of the camera, the battery appears to be fully charged. So I don't know why the charger light still was flashing, but I don't know. Anyway, it seems to be working. So
yeah,
that kind of sent me around in a loop for a while. It was like
I've been going through a rash of my Nikon batteries dying on me. So, but they're also, some of them are 7-8 years old. So,
yeah, you got to keep charging them now and then.
Yeah, you keep charging them, and what I find what's really drives me nuts with Nikon batteries is their batteries are proprietary for their cameras, and if you use an off-brand battery, a lot of them don't work in some of the new cameras, and yet some of them do work. And I've had some that would work for a while, and then all of a sudden the camera would decide, no, I don't like that battery anymore.
Oh my.
So now I'm marking them. Yes, they'll work on the mirrorless. No, they won't work on the mirrorless. And it's hard when you got 10 or so batteries to keep track of.
Yeah, I've gone all mirrorless now. I've gotten rid of all my old Nikon stuff.
Yeah, that's my hope, but I got a ways to go.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else have some questions? Come on, we got all sorts of time. Well, I guess I've got one other question that has to do with Google. I don't know if anybody else is good with Google and setting up emails for businesses with it. I don't know. It was something I was going to talk to Marty about. Maybe Marty, you know about it. But a lot of the groups that I'm working with, we're trying to figure out how to set up with Google. They have Google Docs and a whole Google business thing that costs you $70-some a year. And we're wondering if we need to do that or if we could just do the free Google emails.
Yeah, I mean, most of the websites that I've set up is using what I kind of call generic Google Gmails, just their basic free ones. But then, yeah, you don't have access to their suite of software like that. But if that's something you really, really need, then I guess you go for the $70 a year. But, you know, most of the clubs and organizations I've set up, I've just used, you know, whatever at gmail.com emails, and just seems to work for them.
Okay. Because maybe we'll just set it up that way. We're looking at that for Wacko. We're trying to come up with, and I don't know if how many people think about this, but when you have a website like Wacko has their website, and each camera club has a website, somebody's always in charge of it. And what we're worrying about is somebody passing away on us that has all the passwords, and all of a sudden the website disappears, or doesn't disappear, but you can't renew it or maybe work on it.
And that's exactly why I've set most of these up. I have with like snowmobile clubs, for instance, so that one person isn't the the red line for it. I mean, anybody in that organization that has access to, you know, so then you share that with all the officers of the club, so that they all have access to that email account.
Right.
We do that with our focal point, but we do it with an iCloud account, but that's because the club has an iPad, and so we were able to establish an iCloud account for that, and it's worked really well in that respect.
Okay.
Well, I have a question about Gmail in general, possibly. I have an email account that I didn't, or sorry, Gmail account that I didn't know there's a 15 gigabyte maximum storage capacity. And I don't think you normally hit that real easily because most of those texts are quite small. But every now and then people send me photos or whatever, and then I wind up with, I think, fairly large emails. Well, I finally hit that limit, and of course I get a warning from them saying, we may delay your email, we may slow it down, and on and on and on. If you don't pay, I think it's $1.99 a month, $1.99 a month. And I was just wondering if anybody has run into this problem, and if there's any easy way to figure out what's causing the heavy load for the sizes of these files. How can I easily find the biggest files and then delete those so that they're not clogging up my Gmail account?
I guess one question I'd have is, do you need to keep the old emails? I mean, real old ones?
It depends. Like, for instance, just as a good example would be, originally all of my Wacko information and club informations and all of those things came in that email. So it's always nice to keep those. So I don't keep all of them. I mean, I delete lots of emails every day. I mean, I get 150 in that account a day. So I'm constantly deleting them, but there are some that you would keep just in case you needed to go back. And I'm just not sure what the big ones are that are causing the problem. You know, like, how do I find quickly and easily the largest ones to be sure I can get rid of those first?
Yeah, I'm not sure. What I end up doing is I keep everything for 1 year, and then, so right now I've got emails up to 2021, and everything older than that has gotten deleted, and I usually just download all my attachments right away and store them in iCloud, actually. Because I've got the same problem. I'm about halfway full with my Gmail right now for Wacko. And yeah, I'd be interested if somebody comes up with, I don't use the Gmail interface. I use Apple's mail interface. So because I've got like six or seven email addresses going. So
I'm looking at all the settings in Gmail, and I don't really see anything that really deals with that.
No. And I've been in Gmail quite a bit lately trying to figure out some of that stuff. And they don't make it easy to understand.
Oh, they sure don't. I agree with that, but for
That's
basic
what I,
email, it really is about the simplest way to go for something like I talked about earlier, just camera codes or something, just because then everybody can have access to it. But beyond that, it's not a great email program.
Yeah, I mean, you can't complain. It's free.
Exactly. Right.
It takes a lot for them to keep those things going. So,
One of the other reasons I use it for a lot of the website customers is their calendar program. So integrating Google Calendar is so simple on websites, and then you can subscribe to those. You know, if you're a member of that club, you want updates to their meetings or whatever. So it works pretty slick for that, and that was one of the other driving factors to use it. But those are the two features in Google that I think stand out beyond anything else that they do.
you know, as I say, the problem is finding the largest ones to be sure I'm getting rid of those first. So if somebody had sent me some photos and they're taking up, you know, really large amounts of space, if I can get rid of those, hopefully I can free up a lot of space. The text ones I'm not very concerned about.
yeah.
I know
Well, Mary-
I know you could you used to be able to sort them through, you know, person. You could sort by date, and I'm not quite sure if you can sort by file size.
Yeah,
I've
not that
tried that. It's really, it's a dog of a program to do that because it doesn't work very well. I mean, you can, but it's really a tedious process. So I was hoping there was a quicker way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
No,
wondering-
I'm getting, Mary Kranick says she just pays $2.99, so she has a lot more storage, and then she can access it anywhere. I do it with my iCloud account. I pay a lot per month, and I get 2 terabytes of cloud storage. So I just dump everything into iCloud, and that way I can get at it with any of my computers and my iPhone and my iPad. So I just, like for Wacko, every time I get an attachment, I just download it and
I just found something.
okay, great, Marty.
So and now this may be, this is an older email account, so who knows if they've changed any of that. But right at the top of email, there's a search mail, and then there's on the right side of that search box, there's a little 3 lines there, and if you click on that, it says search mail, and in there you can search sizes greater than, lesser than, you know, it gives you and then megabytes, kilobytes. So that might be where you can search easily enough to break them down by file size. I don't have any emails in here to that have attachments that I can even check it with in this account. But
Yeah, Rick Hawthorne was just say try going to the search bar in Mail and search for file size, 5 megabytes, and it and it shows up. So that there might be in the search bar. Sounds like there must be a way to search.
The other thing I did find when I tried some of this before, it only shows you, I don't know, maybe 15 emails at a time. So if you wanted to delete, let's say 200 or 800, it wasn't easy to select, let's say 50 at a time and then delete them. You had to do like the 15 at a time, delete that. Then the next 15 would come in. Then you could delete that. And you get the next 15. Well, by the time you get through 400 emails, you spend 35 minutes. And I was hoping there was some way to click on the one and then go to one and one, and it clicks everything in between. Then you just
see, that's why I use Apple Mail, because it will do the Gmail, and then you can just start at the bottom. I start at the bottom, which is the oldest, and I work my way up to, I can do a year at a time and select the whole years and delete 20,000 emails, which is what I generally get in a year, and do it in one crack. And I can pick each email service that I use, because I have iCloud or Apple Mail, and I have Gmail, because I have like 3 Gmail accounts.
So Jim, you can set a maximum page size of 100 conversations. So that's in the general settings. So at least you get a little bit more than 15, you know.
That's great. That's great.
Dig through those settings look through those settings and take a look and see what else. I mean, every time I set up a new account, I go through those, and there's just certain things that I kind of go automatically and change. Some has to do with privacy, some has to do with just that, with total size and all that. So
those are great suggestions. Thanks. I'll start looking into that then. Can I ask one other general question?
Sure.
I see we've got a few minutes, and this may be too big for this particular time, but maybe something to bring up as a discussion. I was watching some webinars recently, and they were talking about people that post things to YouTube. And as I understand it, from what I'm hearing from them, YouTube somehow must get information from Google. And when you sign on to YouTube, they basically get all of your searches, anything you've ever done, every place you've ever gone, and so on and so on and so on. But there's a way to stop some of that you can go in and prevent the two of them from communicating. But I'm not sure I have any idea how to set that up. And they did have one other thing I'll just mention for anybody who puts things on YouTube, and I did not know this. As I understand it, when you sign the agreement, you basically give up all of your rights to YouTube. They can publish your stuff anywhere or let other people use it and so on. And then if you're not happy with that, they can shut that down, but they originally will always have that right to put it anywhere they want. So anyway, my real question though is, how do I keep Google from communicating with YouTube? And again, there's some way to do that, but I don't know what that is.
Well, YouTube is owned by Google, so it's they're kind of sharing it in-house, so to speak. So
they're intimately coupled.
Yeah.
And they have, the only way that they can show it to anywhere would be to have the rights to show it. So that's why you sign away your rights. Although if you set it up as a private link, then they can't share a private one. They'll only share the ones that are public.
Yeah,
and you want that to be shared.
The unlisted in the private, right? They're not going to share, but so part of it is how you set that video up to begin with.
Yeah. I gotta admit, I put certain things that I want very private. I don't use YouTube, I use Vimeo. But I pay for that service, so with Vimeo. But I know that when anything that I put on YouTube is going to go anywhere. Plus, they also have they can kill your stuff pretty easy. So if you put stuff out that you shouldn't, or you use copyrighted music, stuff like that will knock you out of YouTube real quick. So
I think it's just another one of those trade-offs. It's a free service overall, so that's how they make their money. Is they're gonna use your content to make them money. It's just that's the trade-off for being a quote-unquote free service.
Yeah,
I mean, that works for a lot of instances. I mean, we've got wackos published on YouTube and PSA, and those work fine. So I guess just be careful what you put on there. If there's something real sensitive, don't. But otherwise, I feel pretty comfortable putting stuff up there.
Yeah, I agree, Brian.
Yeah. No,
one of the things that I also heard, that again, I hope this doesn't interfere with this channel. There was a photographer who used a word that we commonly use for taking pictures, but it sounds, I don't even want to say it because I don't want to, but it's a word we use commonly, and they were using that term on his account, and they basically then banned him, and then he had to go back and say, look, this is a photography kind of term, we use that all the time.
Jim, please spell it. Jim, please spell the word. Please spell the word.
S-H-O-T or S-H-O-O-T would be probably the one that they were being flagged for, because that would come up over and over and over. And it was because as photographers, we use that term all the time. That's a very typical term.
But
Anyway, he
depending
got
upon,
banned, and then it took him a while to get back on. And he mentioned you have to be really careful what you're saying online.
like,
Yeah.
what part of the country he lives in and what his accent is.
I have a T-shirt that says I shoot people, and at the bottom it says, and sometimes I cut off their head. It has a
Wow.
picture of has a picture of a camera on it.
Yeah, you got to be careful. Sometimes I can relate two stories, but I'll just do one. I was photographing the governor, Thompson, and I was near one of his Secret Service agents, or not Secret Service, but one of his security people, and I said, I'm going to be shooting him, and all of a sudden had a couple people around me right away, and you got to learn that I'm going to photograph him. You don't say shoot when you're near a political person, because right away the Secret Service or whatever security is going to go after you. So yeah, and Ken and I just had it happen where I got stopped for speeding up north in Michigan. And I said, yeah, we're going to go shoot the Milky Way. And he looked at me really strange as, what do you mean shoot the Milky Way? I said, we're going to photograph it. So.
Yeah, I went and shot a bunch of elk last night. So,
Yep. Paul, I see your note. We're going to get to yours in just a second. So don't worry. I see it. So yeah, you do have to watch your terminology and the different situations. And I would imagine YouTube, depending on how you're using the words, could be a problem. There are some preference settings that you can set up in Google to help you with some of that stuff. Google Maps is terrible with tracking where you go. So I turned all that stuff off, but yeah. So let's get, Paul Mordo's wanting to know, does anyone use anything besides Lightroom and Photoshop, and how do you like using it? I know we got a number of people here that use different apps for processing images. I know Marty is into what, Luminar or?
Yeah, Luminar AI mostly and on one, and I like both programs. I think it does most things that I ever needed to do. I've never been a Lightroom user, so I can't really compare what I'm missing other than what I hear Jeff talk about or whatever. But certainly there are other imaging editing programs out there besides Lightroom to use, and good ones.
Do you use that as a standalone, or is that a plugin in Photoshop? Luminar?
It's a plugin. It is the plugin for Photoshop, but I use both of those as a standalone. And actually, you can use a Luminar AI as a plugin now for on one to go make a round trip. So, but the way I use both of them are kind of both standalones.
Well,
Even when you use them standalone, though, do they do the same things that Photoshop does? Do you need to go into Photoshop?
I don't want to use Photoshop drama. That's why I use these programs.
You don't use it at all?
I don't use Photoshop at all. I will not be held as their ransom. It's just my personal opinion. And I did up to PS6, I use Photoshop. But
by the way,
Marty, I moved beyond it.
Marty, can I just say to you, the Luminar people may disappoint you in time, because every company is now realizing that they need to make money year after year after year in order to stay alive. And Luminar, as you know, they're going to be charging for updates from now on. At least that's what they're saying on their site. So they may become more likely to be a yearly upgrade like On1 is. On1 does the same thing. But for just a general information, just for people that are thinking, I do use Lightroom as my standard program, but that's because I had it first. On1 is as close to that as you could get without buying, actually buying something like a Lightroom or a Photoshop. And it does all of the same things. It has a library, it maintains the keywords, it does many of those things, and is very easy to use and helps you develop your photos into nicer looking than they were, let's say, out of camera. The advantage of the Luminar stuff is for people who have not had a lot of experience with editing photos. everything is sort of set up in little chunks where you basically click on a filter, you slide little sliders back and forth and say, does this look better? And then you move to the next section. Does this look better? And then you move to the next section. Does this look better? And you can really do a fabulous job of making your pictures come alive, where if you haven't had a lot of experience and you don't know what to do, it can be more difficult if you start with something like a Lightroom or Photoshop. Those kind of require that you have some real knowledge of what you're doing. On1's a little better because I think, again, they have a lot more filters and things they plug in that do some amazing things. But the beauty of their filters is when they apply a filter, they show you what they did off on the right-hand side. So if you don't like, let's say the colors are a little too dramatic for you, well, you can turn off that part of it that happened. So anyway, each program's a little different. So if you're wondering, again, Luminar is really great if you haven't had a lot of experience. Photoshop is the toughest of all. So it's a kind of a range.
Yeah,
Tony. I mean, the amount of processing power, so to speak, you need behind the images, that varies person to person, and not everybody needs all of the features that a Lightroom or a Photoshop can do. And they are very capable programs. Don't get me wrong. I do understand how capable they are, but I think most of the quote unquote average or lower end photographers, just beginning photographers, I should say, just don't need that much processing power.
Yeah. Oh, Tony, did you have something?
Yeah, I have I bought the Affinity programs. I don't know if you can see this.
Yep.
There's Designer, Photo, and Publisher, and it's not a subscription. It's written in England, and you can use it on your laptop, desktop, and iPad. And you can even for a fee, you can store your photos there so you can access them anywhere with iPad, desktop, laptop, or whatever. And they are, to me, it looks a lot like a cross between Lightroom and Photoshop. So that's all.
Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Affinity, yeah.
I use the Affinity programs as well periodically, and they're going to be my thing if I switch out of Adobe, which right now I don't plan to do that, but I will. Sydney Friedman did bring up, and I noticed that too, that Luminar is based in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
It is I'm finding out there's a lot of apps being made in Ukraine. I use Clean My Mac, and they're a Ukraine company as well. So, yeah, it's interesting that there are a lot of programs you could use. Luminar works pretty well. I've used that one. I've used On1 Photo. Both of them can be used standalone and work with all your photo files, just about like Lightroom.
Yep.
So
another one that I've mentioned before, Jeff, is if you're a Mac person, a program called Pixelmator Pro, which is like about a $40 program, and it's a very, very capable image editing program as well, and a graphic design program beyond it for like $40. So just another program that if you're interested in looking at other programs, other alternatives, and you're a Mac person, you can check that one out too.
Yeah, great.
There's two that I use: Dark Table and also Raw Therapy. That's another 2 free platforms that you can use.
Okay.
And Dark Table has come a long way since its inception. And correct me if I'm wrong, Clinton, but I mean it's probably darn near as capable as Lightroom is today.
And that's what it seems like. Similar, correct?
Yeah, great. Oh, great. We're going to move on to our second hour here because I see Jennifer popped in. Hello, Jennifer. Good to see you.
How are you?
Welcome to our group. Just so you can understand our group, we meet once a month and we just talk about everything photography. And when we have questions, they bring them to our group and we try to answer them. You popped in just as we were answering someone that asked how to, what could they use besides Lightroom and Photoshop. So
Okay.
talking all about those different programs. But so thank you for coming. It's great that you could come.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's I spotted you on out of Chicago, so I think it was one of the blogs that you did on photo projects. And then I had somebody else mention to me about it. So actually, they told me to look at it, and that's how I sort of found you, just through out of Chicago. And we know Chris. We've had Chris work with us in different Wacko programs. So he's a great guy. So
He is.
and I know you guys just got done with a big thing. Was
Yeah,
that last weekend?
Yeah, it was 2 weekends ago. It was the live conference online.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Good. Yeah, I couldn't make it. I was busy, but I have too many things to watch.
That's not a bad problem to have.
Yeah. So we're just going to go through and talk with you a little bit. How did you get started in all this stuff, first off, I guess?
So I picked up photography as a hobby about 9 years ago now, when I was still working my full-time job. I'm originally from Illinois. I grew up in Naperville and then lived in Plainfield, and then now I live in Golden, Colorado. So just a little background. So I live in Golden, Colorado now. I work with my partner, David Kingham. Together, we're exploring exposure. We teach photography workshops all throughout the American West, and we travel pretty much full time in our 4-season travel trailer while we're on the road teaching. So Golden is my home base. And that's where we are right now. We're only here about like every few months or so, just for a little while before we jet off again. But I originally started out as a hobby photographer. My dad was an underwater photographer, so I grew up kind of watching him do that. And then finally around like midway during my career, I needed something for stress relief, and I'm an avid hiker. So I thought, well, I'm going to pick up a camera again and just, I want to, share the stories of the landscape. So I did it as a hobby. And when I realized because my dad lived in Denver at the time, when I realized I was using all my vacation time to go out to photograph, and then come right back to my job and then start like dreaming about my next trip, I thought maybe it's time for a change. So I got divorced, which was a good thing. It kind of propelled me into my life change, and I moved out of Illinois after 34 years. Moved out to Denver, met David, and he said, because he was already teaching workshops on the road, and he was like, well, why don't you, come teach with me? So I transitioned to a full-time photographer 6 years ago, and I've been teaching on the road with David ever since.
Wow. Quite a journey there.
Yeah.
But sounds like fun. I know I've been a photographer for 40 years, but I've been stuck in one place. You're in a gorgeous area, and I know you're teaching in a really pretty area. So yeah. So tell me a little bit about you're traveling in a travel trailer. I always thought that would be a great way to do a lot of this stuff. How well is that working?
It is. So right off the bat, it was definitely a major life change. I didn't come into this like totally willy-nilly. So my background is in geology and veterinary medicine. So I did veterinary medicine for 14 years. I still have my license. I keep that, current and everything just in case. My best advice is if anyone wants to dive headfirst into photography full time, just make sure you have a good nest egg and you kind of have a backup plan, because I think COVID taught all of us, we lost all of our workshops in a matter of a year because of COVID. We had to transition to online teaching. And there was definitely a point in time when I thought I'd have to go back to my old career. which was fine. But so yeah, we it was, David traveled almost full time on the road even before I met him. He was in the architectural field and he got laid off just because the company fell on hard times, and that kind of propelled him into his photography career 10 years ago.
Wow.
So initially he traveled in a van. So when we first started dating, that was cool while we were dating. And then as I was mulling over, well, do I do this full-time switch or not? I kind of encouraged him, and he had already kind of had the idea in his head. And I said, I don't think a van is going to cut it for me, like full-time. Like it's a tiny, tiny space. And I have 2 cats too that travel with us on the road. So I said, with the cats and everything, that's probably not going to work. So we started looking at 4-season travel trailers. So we have a Northwood Manufacturing, it's called a Nash. It's a 17-foot travel trailer. Or maybe it's 24 foot, but the living space is 17 feet, something like that. And it's, it's an apartment on wheels. We have, a full kitchen. We have a microwave stove, fridge, freezer. We have a, dining area. We have a full queen size bed, which we quickly replaced with a sleep number bed just because RV mattresses are not comfy. And since we do this full time, that was one of my stipulations. We have a full bathroom with a shower, sink, toilet, everything, air conditioning, heat. So it's essentially just a little apartment on wheels. And yeah, we've been doing that for 6 years, minus most of, 2020 because of COVID, obviously, when we came back home, but it works out pretty well. And it's a lifestyle choice that's not for everyone. We won't do it indefinitely. We do plan on settling down and building a house. We have some property in Ridgeway, Colorado that we'll build on in a few years, but it's been fun. It allows us to really spend more time in the places that we love. We don't teach workshops anywhere where we don't know intimately. So it allows us to spend time mostly, like we spend a lot of our time in Death Valley National Park, Yellowstone National Park. But it really opened the door to my creativity, like being able to focus on that full time, just really propelled me along in my, photography journey. And it's really helped, and it's cool. And I know that, it seems to be like a glamorous lifestyle, but it definitely has its negatives. They just don't share that on social media. But yeah, there are, like mail is a problem. You can generally get packages in Amazon wherever you are. But thankfully my dad stays at the house here. We share a house with my dad and he does most of our mail for us. But we still come home for doctor appointments and tax things and all the fun stuff that you don't really think about. But yeah, us and the 2 cats, it's been a great journey, but it's really it's great being able to spend, the majority of the time in nature and hiking and photographing. And it just really, helps our workshops and, helps us because we take clients to places that we just know like the back of our hand from being able to spend time there. And yeah, it's been really fun.
Great. While we're going here, everybody else that's watching here, throw in questions in the Q&A. That's what we're here. We've got Jennifer for about an hour here that we can talk. And I got a list of questions, but you guys are here too. You can ask questions, so please put them in the chat.
Now you guys are in Wisconsin?
Yeah, we're in, most everybody's in Wisconsin. We got one person in Arizona, and we cover a little bit of the area, but we're mainly a Wisconsin Camera Club group.
That's fun.
So, and we got a few from Illinois. So, yeah, we cover all over. So yeah, it's fun. So I know I had somebody mention here about your abstract photography, and that was one of the things that caught my attention. Some of your abstract, the stuff that you were doing with that photo challenge project, those were some neat photos.
Thank you.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So abstract photography, if you had asked me, 7 years ago when I was just doing this as a hobby, you're going to really love abstracts, I would have said, I don't think so. Cause I chased those grand landscapes from early on in my career before transitioning to things that really fit more my style. But I kind of think my love of abstracts like I knew I loved abstracts, but I didn't know I'd like photographing them. So my background in geology, we used to spend a lot of time looking at thin sections of rocks under a microscope, which yield these beautifully like geometric, abstract, colorful patterns when you're looking at them. And then when I transitioned to veterinary medicine, my specialty was clinical pathology. So again, I found myself spending most of my time behind a microscope looking at, blood cells, anything like cellular. And it just really, that was my jam. So I guess it's not a huge leap to go, when I first got my macro lens, I was like, I don't know if I'm really going to get into this. And I started just playing around with it. And a lot of my abstracts are actually taken with my telephoto lens.
Okay.
I just, something in my brain clicked and I fell back in love with looking behind instead of a microscope this time, but my lens at these tinier little details in the landscape. And they're really what, intrigue me and keep me excited about my photography. And I just really like showcasing the extraordinary and showing how showcasing the ordinary and showing how it can be quite extraordinary, things that we walk by every single day, but just by taking a little closer look, they're really quite phenomenal. So yeah, abstracts, I just, David jokes with me a lot when we're out hiking, I spend most of my time, looking at the ground, which isn't a bad thing. But in the field, I've had a few strange looks, when there's some beautiful sunset happening somewhere and I'm in a parking lot, like looking at mud, for instance, because that just excites me at that moment.
Sure.
They'll come up and say, hey, the sunset's happening that way. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good. Thanks. Like, enjoy. But yeah, I think that's kind of where the deep-seated love of those abstracts comes from, just because I really enjoyed those tinier details in my past two careers. And I see that Brian is asking, do you have any special post-processing to get your abstract look? I really don't. So one thing to know about me is I am not a technical person. I spend approximately 5 to 10 minutes per image, and that includes Lightroom and Photoshop, and I'm done. I'm out of there, done, moving on to the next thing. I totally appreciate people that have the skills to do so many amazing things with Photoshop. I'm just not that person. David is kind of a little bit that person, but not really. So he's my tech guy if I ever do have to like blend something, like if I take like an exposure of the night sky with like a twilight foreground, like it's always like, David, can you help me? I fully admit that. But really all I do in Lightroom is I play a lot with my midtone contrast. And that's pretty much all that I do. Instead of using the contrast slider, I'll usually bring my exposure down a little bit, utilize my whites, do any cropping that I want in Lightroom, any little color adjustments, which are usually very slight. I'll then move into Photoshop and work with the TK panel. If any of you are familiar with that, it's just a luminosity mask panel, and I'll work with, enhancing my midtone contrast just a little bit. Just because I find that really makes the images pop without really adding saturation and contrast with the normal sliders. And then I'll always clone out anything in there with Photoshop instead of Lightroom. And that's pretty much it. A lot of my abstracts were taken during twilight, especially my mud, my salt crystals, some of my sand dune abstracts. And the key there is, those surfaces reflect light and they reflect color. So if you head out at twilight when the sun hasn't come up yet, you've got those really pretty pastel skies, things like salt, badlands, sand, mud, all reflect that color with a little bit longer exposure time. So a lot of the color that I capture in my abstracts is as is. It just takes patience and you just kind of have to know what light to work with. And I just taught this at the Out of Chicago Death Valley conference. My friend Sarah Marino and I did mud abstract photography. We held a few classes on that, and students were super amazed. We'd head out there at literally, it's still pitch black out. They're kind of wondering, what are we doing out here? And it's like, well, just bear with us. Like, this is when the magic happens. And if you're just there right as twilight is coming into the landscape, you can actually see it transitioning through your viewfinder, your live screen, or your live view. I mean, from like the first inklings of twilight right before until the sun rises, the landscape just goes through this very subtle transition of color, and that is reflected in the mud. And people were just amazed. And as they took their photos, they could see the progression of light throughout the morning and began to understand. So I think that's one key. It's not so much the post-processing of my abstracts, more just working with the light opportunities that are given to me on a particular morning or evening.
So that's, I was always curious on how you, because I know I photographed mud and it never comes out the way your photos have come out. So it's early morning seems to be the time before sunrise, huh?
Yeah, and evening too, right after
And
sunset.
evening.
I think a lot of
Okay.
people just assume as soon as the sun sets and the show is over, but David and I and our students will stay out almost an hour past and still continue to shoot. And even if they're not abstracts, grand landscapes, small scenes, there's a whole different set of conditions that you can work with that just create really cool lighting opportunities if you're just willing to be a little patient and stay past.
Sure.
But that's the biggest
Okay.
takeaway there.
Yeah. We got Sydney's asking, would you have any examples that you could show us? I don't know. I know we didn't really prepare you for anything.
That's okay.
My emails were pretty generic, but yeah, if I don't know if you could show us anything.
I can. I do have some images prepared.
Great.
Let me make sure this works.
Yeah.
Can you guys see a
Oh yeah.
picture? Okay. So these aren't in any order. So let me find. Let's see here. So here's a good example. This is actually a recent photo from February.
Wow.
So this is actually, these are sand ripples, and this is twilight. So twilight, we're very familiar with, obviously. Twilight, that's kind of the blue hour, depending on, what you've learned and, kind of what you know. But this blue color was completely natural. So nothing in here has been enhanced. There was a little bit of warmth on the top of this dune. So what we're looking at are sand ripples that are kind of going up a dune. So the dune top is like probably about a few inches above the top of the screen here, where there's a little mound, and it kind of came down, and we had just had a windstorm the day before. So all these ripples were just naturally created by the wind, and nobody had walked on them yet. And what caught my eye here was just the fact that it kind of looks like a total optical illusion if you look at it one way or another way. But you can see the little ridges here were kind of catching the light of twilight. The blue are the shadows, and where there wasn't any kind of shadow going on, the sand was collecting that warmer light kind of right before the sun came up. And I really enjoy warm and cool contrasts in my images. So that's kind of where this is a good example of working with that twilight light with those blue shadows and those warm tones. So this is something that, I didn't add this color post-processing. Like, this is pretty much what it looked like. And I wish I should have been prepared. I could have shown you my raw images too, just to kind of show you. But here's another example. These are mud tiles, dried mud tiles from Death Valley. This was taken twilight after sunset. So mud is very reflective even when it's dry. So any of the blue that you see here in the center of the tiles, that's actually the sky reflecting onto the mud. And then whatever minerals and sediment are kind of making up the edges of the tiles here are just a little more orange and yellow. But this was, I believe, like a 4-second exposure to actually bring out those colors.
Okay.
So yeah, that's just a good example. Wow. And then don't know that I have.
I never got to Death Valley at a decent time. I got there for sunset, but I only got to like Artist Point and a few spots because I'm usually was traveling for seminars or something, and I would disappear for a day and go to Death Valley from Vegas, and that doesn't work real well.
No, you definitely need time there. It's such an expansive park that, I mean, even spending 6 winters there for 2 or 3 months at a time, we feel like we've barely scratched the surface. But yeah, if you can take the time to spend even a week there, there's so much to explore. And it's kind of fun because you can kind of pretty much go wherever you want. It's not like other national parks. They have a few, established trails that you can't walk off of and, delicate areas. But for the most part, you can go anywhere. It's really kind of fun. And if you're an intrepid explorer, it's very rewarding. So here's some wet mud from Utah. So this is a good example of more twilight light. So this is like fresh mud. So this was about 2 days after a flash flood had gone through, and I went out searching for mud because it's one of my obsessions. And you can see here that the wet mud just picks up every tone and even some reflections here. And this again was twilight. This was evening, a little bit after the sun had gone down. And, you know, this night, the sky was a little more blue purple. So you can see that reflecting in the actual mud, and you can see the highlights here where you can tell it's wet. And you're kind of getting a little bit of warmth in there. But yeah, it's really just about working with that twilight light. And I was working, I should have grabbed it before, it would have been a good idea. I'm working on a series. I'm going to be putting together an abstract presentation here this year. And I've got a few slides kind of showing the transition of light across like sand and mud tiles, just so people can see, but I have, those are buried right now. I should have planned ahead. But yeah, so that's pretty much the gist of it. You can really, I mean, if you're just patient enough and you kind of take the time to explore the different qualities of light. I'm very much a photographer that's not, you know, there's good light versus bad light. I feel that if you start labeling light, it kind of takes away many opportunities that we have and kind of closes our mind a little bit. And then we kind of get stuck in that rut where, oh, it's harsh light, there's nothing to shoot today. Actually, let me share this photo. This is actually a good example of when you do have harsh light. So I head out usually around noon to 2 o'clock on mud tiles, and I shoot black and white. So that's a good example of heading out at like 1 p.m. on a day where, yeah, it may not work for a lot of the grand landscape, but it works for other things. Black and white opportunities exist during lots of the, you know, boring types of days that people would talk about or would classify them as. But if you're willing to work with abstracts and textures and patterns, sometimes that light can be some of the prettiest light to work with. So yeah, I just, by having a little bit more of an open mind and learning to work with twilight, it's really expanded my opportunities as a photographer.
Yeah. How do you, I know this is a strange question, I guess, but how do you spot that stuff? I mean, I guess I don't pay attention to the ground enough.
Many years of experience and having probably an unhealthy obsession with mud.
Okay.
So, and my obsession with mud, I've done some, you know, introspection. And as a geologist, one of my favorite things to find was fossilized mud cracks and like fossilized ripple marks, because it's just fascinating to see even millions of years ago, the same processes that are shaping the earth today were still in the process of shaping the earth back then. So nothing's really changed, you know, like erosion patterns change, but the process of erosion hasn't changed over hundreds of millions of years. So it's fascinating to me to see those, you know, fossilized mud cracks and fossilized ripple marks as evidence of past environments. And then being able to walk out into the desert and see the exact same thing going on to this day in real time just fascinates me. And it kind of bridges those two worlds in my mind. So Death Valley, when they get at least a quarter or half an inch of rain, which doesn't seem like much to us, but in the desert, it's huge. You definitely get flash floods. And anytime you get flash floods, you get washes of mud, same thing in Utah, Arizona, any of the desert areas. And if you give it a few days, that mud will slowly, the water will dry or pass through. You get wet mud, which is that kind of purple mud that I just showed. So you get that for about a day or two, and then things happen pretty quickly. Then it starts cracking. So it's just being aware of the weather conditions around me from past experience of walking washes or different areas in Death Valley, knowing that certain playas will flood after a big rain event. One thing that helps is we do spend 2 to 3 months in Death Valley teaching every winter. So it helps to be in that spot for that amount of time, just because you learn the weather patterns and you kind of learn what's going on. So you can spend more time focusing on those things.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just, you know, observational photography for me. So it's, you know, just wandering around, you know, being curious about things, looking in washes. Oh, I wonder where this goes. And, oh, look at this puddle over here. Oh, there is a patch of mud here. It's just about kind of following my curiosity and seeing. And then over the years, as my mud obsession has grown, I'm very aware of where to look for it now. So if we spy that there's going to be a big rain in Death Valley, we're prepared. We kind of know where to go. Utah, same thing. That was this August, that mud image. And it was probably like maybe the last week of August, and Utah had a pretty healthy monsoon season this year. So there were plenty of opportunities to go ahead and find mud like that. And one interesting thing too about that mud, even though I don't have a picture showing this, but even with the West, I'm sure we're all familiar, you know, wildfire season is very much a thing. We've had a lot of fires. I don't remember where the smoke was coming from this year, but the skies were super smoky in Utah for about a week when we were there, right after one of these flash flood events. And working with that twilight light was different because there was such a smoky haze in the atmosphere. It actually transitioned that twilight light from the pretty blues and purples and pinks into like very warm colors, almost like very golden tones, just because that haze was creating a cast. And that was something I had never seen before. So it was almost a new experience. And I've collected a few images of that, just showing a different kind of situation that I didn't expect. So just, finding out things like that, but mostly it's a lot of just looking at the ground and paying attention to details, which can be hard. You kind of have to train yourself to do that, but it's pretty much just, how I see those things and find those scenes.
Yeah. Interesting. We got Trey Forrester asking, there's mud and there's mud. What jumps out at you first? The color, the texture, the light?
Gosh, that's a good question.
Bad mud?
I don't know if there's bad mud. Well, there probably, yeah, I will admit there is some mud out there that's not too exciting. I think for me, what triggers my interest first is probably the texture. Is it cracked? Does it look like, kind of whipped meringue? Is it those really cool, like flow patterns? That probably hits me first. And then next will be the color and what the light is doing. And sometimes I find things midday. And if I don't particularly want to work with black and white, I'll kind of make a note in my Gaia app on my phone of where this location is. And then I'll revisit it during twilight to see what, what kind of changes I see. Does it look different? What other lighting opportunities might I be able to work with? So things like that. But yeah, it's, that's the one fun thing about mud. It's so ephemeral. You never know what you're going to find. It always looks different, depending on what mineral makeup the mud is, whether it's coming from this type of rock or some other kind of clay rock, it always changes. But yeah, that's, yeah. Yeah, no, not necessarily bad mud, but yeah, there is less interesting mud and then there's cool mud. So
yeah. I've got Brian asking, when is your next mud workshop?
Yeah. I know. Isn't that fun? Sarah and I were kind of talking about that. We're like, that would be a fun concept, like just a mud workshop. The problem is you don't know when you're going to see it or find it. So I do have a book on mud coming out. I'm putting together an ebook. It's mostly a portfolio book. And I think I've got about 50 pictures curated for the book right now, with just paired with a little bit of writing. It'll just be a simple ebook that I'll sell on my website. But I got to a point this past year where we had a really good mud season in Utah. We had a really good mud season in Death Valley in December. And I had over 200 images. And, David and I were talking and I said, I know I have a gallery, abstract mud on my website. I said, but I'm overwhelmed with these and I quite don't know what to do. So he suggested, he's like, maybe you should put together just like a mud portfolio book, black and white, color, everything, all different types of mud, and pair it with some writing just about, my travels and finding mud and my obsession with it. So that'll be coming out in about a month or two. So I'll be showcasing some of my favorite mud. It sounds like a crazy idea, but textures and patterns, people enjoy those things. So I figured that'd be a good way to showcase it. But if you come on a Death Valley workshop with us, more than likely, we always focus on mud for at least an evening or two. Usually there's always something in Death Valley, whether it's cracked mud or fresh mud, you can always find something. So I guess that's the closest I get to like a mud workshop. But that's a good question. I like that.
Yeah, no. Ken Warning's asking, could you explain your slow photography process and what happens when you first arrive and you see a great scene?
Definitely. So slow photography is something that I got into a few years ago. And before I knew it was a thing, I think it was just something that I naturally started practicing. So being a very detailed oriented person. So when I arrive on a scene, especially more like a grand scenic, they can be quite overwhelming, especially if you're looking at something like a mountain range or a valley or a sand dune field. And one of the first things I like to do is take what's called a visual inventory, or it's kind of like a grocery list of what you're seeing in front of you. And I find that this kind of helps kind of slow your brain down. It stops that process, of your brain kind of spinning and going, what do I focus on first? And I think a lot of times I see photographers, and I still do this sometimes myself, we get out to a scene, we put our tripod down, we put our camera on our tripod, and then, we see something, we shoot it, but then we don't move for the next like hour and a half. So I used to get tunnel vision like that too. And I realized I was missing a bunch of little opportunities around me, because my whole way of thinking is I'd rather go to a scene, and if I come back with one great image, fantastic. But how awesome would it be if I could come back from that scene and have maybe like 8 or 10 images that I can at least go through when I go home of different stories from that landscape, instead of coming back with one. I like to maximize my opportunities in the field, and I feel that this process kind of helps. So I always survey first, and that includes taking the visual inventory. So what do I see in front of me? Let's say I'm looking out at a mountain range, and I've got like a forest in front of it. Or actually, I can just like show you real quick. I actually have an example of this that I can share. Bear with me here a second.
No problem.
Pull it up. This is the best way to describe or to explain it. It's in one of my presentations. Bear with me here. It's opening. All right, let me share my screen. Okay. So this is my slow photography presentation. Bear with me. Actually, you know what? Let me just go back before I made my thing mad. All right, you're just gonna see the ugly notes and everything, but let me just get to the slide. So here's a good example. So let's change scenes a little bit. So let's talk about like when you get to a dune field like this. So it's really easy, to get here and go, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. I'm just going to take this one shot and then I've got it and I'm going to go home. But there are a bunch of different little stories going on here. So when I talk about a visual inventory, what I'm doing is breaking apart the scene into what I see and what are the compositional elements. So if I were to break down this scene, we've got some storm clouds and light. We've got some mountains back there. We've got ridges. We've got some light patches contrasting with some shadows. And we've got some really cool ripples. And it's really hard to see here, but there are these really cool textured ripples down here. And we have blowing sand, or what I like to refer to as wispies. So yes, we've got this great grand scenic here, but we also have all these little different components. And it's up to you as to what story you want to share from the scene along with the grand scene. Oh, and we have some sand dune peaks, which there we go. And one thing that I do that helps too is break it down into like, the literal. So we have some warm, cool contrast here in the storm clouds. We've got lines, we've got contrast with those light and darks. We've got textures and patterns. We have movement. That's what you could see that blowing sand as movement. And we have triangles in our sand dunes. So here's an example of, let me just move myself out of the way, of 4 different scenes that I shot that night along with the grand scenic. So I wanted to play with these sand ripples and that contrasting light. I pointed my camera down to catch these little radiating ripples with the last bit of light kind of highlighting the ridges. I captured this little S curve with the wispies coming off the base of the curve. And I stayed about an hour after sunset and then waited for twilight to fall on the sand dunes being reflective, picked up that purple color from the sky, and I ended up with this scene. So, it's all about breaking down the scene like that. Same thing with Yellowstone here. Here's just another quick example. So this is lower falls of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And if you arrive in the spring and summer and you arrive at Artist Point at about 10 o'clock to 10:30, you'll catch a rainbow at the base of the falls here. So if I see this scene, I see we have a waterfall. We've got some water texture in the waterfall. We've got some interesting rocks. We've got a rainbow and some really pretty mist at the base of the falls. We have this little tree. This little tree is affectionately known to me as Fred. I have named him. He's one of my favorite trees to photograph in the world. I've photographed him through every different season in Yellowstone, and I don't know, I just connect with that little tree. And then we've got some trees and some colorful ground here. And from that one morning, yes, I came away with this beautiful grand scenic, but by taking the time to look at the rocks across the canyon here, this is taken from a little patch over here. This is hydrothermally altered rhyolite. So it creates these really cool kind of scar patterns and textures and fractures in the walls of the canyon. I just played with some smaller scenes, framing the rainbow with the rocks and the trees. I zoomed in at the base of the waterfall as the rainbow was kind of dissipating as the morning went on, and kind of caught some cool colors here in the falls. And then again, just another small scene. And then sometimes we see stories that, we don't really see with our first main lens, but as we sit there and observe the scene, we start to see smaller stories. So here, I actually noticed these birds flying in and out of the rainbow in the mist. These are violet green swallows. They nest up on the walls of the canyon, and then they eat bugs. And I don't know what it is. Maybe the bugs are more prevalent in the mist. I'm not sure, but they swoop down all day, every day, and get these bugs. And they're very acrobatic and very pretty. So that's just a good example of a smaller scene that, by taking the time to slow down, you start to see these details. So that's the first step of the process, is just, leaving your camera in the bag. One thing too, we all have these wonderful smartphones now in our pockets that are essentially a camera. So one thing I encourage people to do is, leave the heavy camera behind and maybe just walk around and line up some compositions with your smartphone. And sometimes that can lead you to something that you're like, oh, I think I'll get out my real camera and I want to spend some time working with this. I've just found that this kind of helps that tripod hole syndrome that a lot of people get into, where they just plant and then they're done. And then get serious about it when you've taken the time to kind of look at the landscape, you've picked out some little stories you want to focus on, and then get out your camera and tripod. But that's pretty much my process. I also just follow things that are curious to me. What is the light doing? Just taking the time to kind of be patient and be present in the landscape, and, photographing things that you're passionate about, like mud. I also enjoy dolphin photography, which I've got a wild dolphin project that I've worked on. So that's something that I'm passionate about, that I like to spend time on. But really, it's just about getting to a scene and just kind of taking it all in. I think so many times as photographers, and I know it's about chasing the light and, getting those perfect moments. It's, definitely not saying, don't do that. But when you have the time, definitely just go out and try to be a slower photographer, just kind of leave your expectations behind, listen for those little stories through your lens, and just take the time to kind of see what's there. And I think that's been one of the most transforming things in my photography, is just by taking that time, I've walked away with a lot more appreciation and a lot of really nice moments that I've enjoyed photographing, along with that grand scenic, but also sharing the stories in that scene.
Sure.
So in a rough way, that's pretty much my process. And that's just kind of what being a slower photographer is about.
Yeah, we all need to slow down a lot more. It's, I came from the old film days, and 2.25 and 4x5 film cameras, which really forced you to slow down and look at stuff more, because you only had a couple of shots
right
that you could
and
take.
It was expensive.
Yeah, it was expensive to do, and a lot of equipment to haul around. But these days, you're out, and we're out shooting, and we need to slow down and look at the scene. I've learned from a couple photographers to just sit there for almost 10 or 15 minutes and looking at the scene, trying to figure out what I want to take photos of, instead of, doing like a lot of people do, plop that tripod down and shoot. And
I
take one shot, and then you want to move somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm still guilty of that too. And I get it. If there's a rainbow happening and it's amazing, well, of course you have to be quick and you have to take that. I think the slow photography advice comes when you're not trying to get something really quickly and you have the time to spend in a location, on a vacation or a trip. And you have that time to kind of explore and look around. That's when it comes in handy. But yes, it's absolutely, I get it. There are times when you have to move fast. In fact, if you ask, Chris Smith from out of Chicago, we were just talking about this a few weeks ago. He still cracks up because he ended up joining Sarah and I out of Death Valley on one of our mud outings, just to come along and see. So we were out there, and Sarah and I were trying to stress, okay, yes, we're looking around, we're being slower photographers, but there was that little pocket, right as the sun dips behind the mountain, that there's a 1 minute period of this really gorgeous light. And all of a sudden I was just like, okay, I know we're slow photographers right now, but I'm like, now we got to work fast. I'm like, this light is going to be gone in like 1 minute. So we got to go. We got to do fast photography. And he was just cracking up about that. And, you know, we were both laughing about it later. And he's like, that just made me so, that made me laugh so hard. Like we're out there, you know, being oriented to these details and slowing down. But then there was that one moment where it was like, wait, guys, okay, you got to get this. Like, so those moments do still exist, but in the long term, just kind of slowing down and being a little bit more present and mindful can really take your photography a long way.
Yeah, neat. Pat Lynch is asking, how much do you shoot with a tripod versus handheld?
So, my tripod, that's a story. I hated my tripod, like, and a lot of it was just because of the model I was using. But I'm very much a wander around and shoot kind of person. So sometimes I just feel like the tripod can be a burden, especially when I'm experimenting. But I would say now, and that comes with the caveat, unfortunately, I have learned, because there were some shots that I said, oh, I can just do this handhold. I'm just going to, handheld. I'm going to bump up my ISO a bit and I'll be fine. And I get home, look at my images and I'm like, oh, it's so blurry. Like I should have had my tripod. So after enough of those experiences, I have now recognized that, if it's like daylight, my light is good enough, I can get away with it. I will most definitely handhold most of the time, just because I feel it's a little more freeing. But anytime it gets a little lower in light, or it's something that I really enjoy and I just don't want to mess it up. And then obviously twilight, you need your tripod. I do use my tripod. So I would say a good ratio would probably be I handhold maybe 40% of the time now, and I use my tripod 60%. And a lot of that too is because I do a lot of focus stacks of my textures if I can't get it all into one frame. So obviously you need the tripod. Unless you're a Canon user with the R5, all my friends use Canon, and one of the features there is you can actually handhold focus stacks now with the mirrorless technology. So that's crazy and really cool. I'm still on a DSLR right now. I'm planning on moving up to maybe a Nikon Z2 because I shoot Nikon, but the mirrorless system is calling to me, and I'm tired of carrying my DSLR on like 10-mile hikes. So I will be playing in that realm soon, but to answer the question, I would say it's probably 60-40 with my tripod. And I've learned to love my tripod. I have one now that I really like and I don't mind using. And it's, that's the important thing. If you're comfortable with your equipment, you get along with it a lot better. So just make sure it's something that you enjoy using. And I think makes a big difference.
Yeah. And as they keep getting them lighter and lighter and easier to carry, that helps quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Trey Forrester is asking, can you talk about your rock abstracts?
Oh, yeah. Let's see.
We've talked about mud. Now we might as well move to rocks.
Yeah, let's talk. It'll be like a geology photography share. I can give you some ideas of my rock abstracts. Let me share again. Let me get out of this. Let me go to Lightroom. So rocks. Actually, I don't have my most infamous rock one in here. I'll find it for you afterwards. So rocks are kind of the same way. So I just look for little.
You're not sharing right now.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
I thought I
okay.
hit share. That's weird.
Yeah, it jumped out after you closed your PowerPoint, I think.
Interesting. Let's try this again. Okay, you probably see my emails now. Let me move this. Okay.
Here we go.
Okay. So rocks are kind of the same way. And obviously being a geologist, I obviously love rocks. This is actually a slot canyon. This is sandstone. But, I know we're used to seeing a lot of those slot canyons that are, wide angle and really gorgeous and, they're amazing. But I took some time with my telephoto to kind of focus more on the patterns and textures. And this, rocks reflect light as well. So this is an example. This is a slot canyon in Arizona. I forget which one it is. But, I really liked these different waves of this sandstone and these lines, but this little pocket. So the reds and the oranges that you see here are reflected light in the canyon. So that happens when sun is hitting one wall and it bounces off and hits a shaded wall, but it gives it that reflected light. So that's the colors that you see here, these pinks and these reds and these oranges. But now here, this was actually facing, this little ledge here was facing directly up to the sky. And this is actually the blue sky reflecting on the sandstone. So yeah, a lot of the blues that you see in slot canyons are actually the blue skies, and you need blue skies to appreciate these colors and especially the reflected light. Because if you have a cloudy day, you don't see this. So a lot of my rocks, I just work with different types of light. Here's another one. Again, a sandstone little slot canyon, just working with that reflected light here that's bouncing off the wall, or, this is a little ledge here. There's a wall behind this that the sun is directly hitting, and then it's bouncing back and lighting up this little corridor. And you can kind of see some blues on the edges here. Working with shadows is another thing that I really enjoy. So this is just some sandstone in Zion National Park with a big old tree kind of creating these dappled light shadows on this kind of rippled sandstone rock. So it's just another light opportunity I like to work with. We saw this one. This is that hydrothermally altered rhyolite. This was actually a boulder just sitting in a meadow up in the San Juans in Colorado. So I was surrounded by these gorgeous mountains, but there was this really cool giant boulder next to me that had these amazing, almost like lightning patterns in it. And being a geologist, I couldn't even fathom and start to tell you what this is probably made of. I can tell you it's a metamorphic rock. It's been chemically and heated and chemically altered. But it was just really cool. And then when you get to Death Valley, you've got all sorts of different rock opportunities, and rock abstracts are kind of the same. You look for the lines, the textures, the patterns. Let me find it. Here we go. So this is one of my favorite rock walls in Death Valley. So what we're looking at here, we're actually like looking up at the bottom of a rock shelf, and all of this rock is kind of eroding away over the years, and it's fracturing off at these angular patterns. And this rock has been altered by iron. So you've got a lot of nice red colors in here, and the rock is kind of like a blue slate gray, but again, it's kind of reflecting that blue sky. So it creates this really cool pattern of this really cool contrast of colors, let alone the patterns. So with my rock abstracts, I'm just looking for, interesting geometric shapes, lines, patterns, anything that kind of catches my eye. I don't know if I have any other rock ones. Here's another, this is more of a small scene, but another canyon in Death Valley, kind of looking up in this amphitheater with these really cool bended, folded layers. And again, just kind of the geometry and following the lines. So when I do my rock abstracts, it's kind of what I'm looking for. You can do anything. You can, focus on the minerals or really sparkly areas of rocks. You can look for those textures and patterns. All of those were taken with my telephoto lens, but I know you can get down really close with a macro lens and appreciate really cool things too.
Sure.
So yeah, kind of the same process.
What since you're talking about your telephoto lens, what zoom lengths are you working with a telephoto?
So I really enjoy working with, so the majority of those images were taken with my 28-300 lens. So a really, really nice spectrum of focal lengths. But I'd say most of my abstracts with that lens are probably taken between 100 and 200 millimeters from a tripod or just me shooting straight down. And I do have a 100 to 400 that I'll get out occasionally too.
Yeah. Okay. Trey Forrester also asks, how has your photography been inspired by, Michael Shane Bloom's
Oh,
work?
Michael. I love Michael. He's a good friend. I actually didn't really know, and if Michael ever watches this, I'm sorry, Michael. I didn't really know of Michael for the first few years of my photography. I love all his time-lapse stuff, and he just does amazing work to begin with. But yeah, I can't say he was one of my inspirations, but I do love his work. And I actually just got to meet him for the first time a few months ago out of Death Valley, and he's just a wonderful dude. Like he's so friendly and down to earth. Yeah, he's really, really nice. If you don't know of him, definitely go check out his work. But yeah, no, I don't really have any inspirations. I like looking at other people's work, but I also I practice, if any of you know who Cole Thompson is, he practices, he's an amazing black and white photographer here in Colorado, but he practices something called photographic celibacy. And what that is he doesn't really look at anyone else's work. And I was kind of like that for the first few years. And now I do enjoy looking at people's work, but if I'm going to somewhere new, I don't want to see what people have done from there, just so I can kind of keep a clean brain.
Sure.
But I think a lot of my inspiration, especially with my Yellowstone work, comes from just landscape painters. I know a lot of people don't really think of that when they're thinking of photography inspiration, but they were way ahead of us all. Just the way they work with the light and make their compositions up in their paintings. Albert Bierstadt is one of my huge inspirations for a lot of my landscape work, just that really luminous, glowy, ethereal light that he paints into his scenes, especially being in Yellowstone with the steam and everything that kind of creates that look. Thomas Moran too, I've been inspired by a lot of his stuff. But yeah, a lot of my small scene work just comes from what I'm curious about and what I'm seeing happening at the time. But yeah, it's good to, have inspirations and, look up to people. It's just, I caution that, when you do that, you just don't, fall into the trap. Are you influenced or are you inspired? You don't want to start, copying things. And, at any time I take something that's been done before, I'm very clear. And I said, this was inspired by, like Alex Noriega, or Sarah Marino introduced me to looking at salt crystals. So I always like to give, credit where it's due, because,
Sure.
if I've been inspired by somebody, it doesn't mean you can't shoot it. Just, give them a little shout out that, they kind of helped inspire you. And, that's just kind of how I work. But yeah, as far as my own photography, not too much other photography inspiration there, just kind of going out and sharing my own stories.
Yeah. Okay. Neat. Yeah. That's interesting stuff. Some of the photos that I saw, I guess on that photo challenge were shooting in the canyons. How do you approach? I've never been able to get those kind of shots. I haven't shot in canyons too often, just a little bit in Death Valley, walking.
Mm-hmm.
But my problem was I was shooting during the middle of the day, which is usually the worst time to shoot. But I saw a couple of your canyon shots where the canyons lit up so nice in the distance, but the walls were darker.
Yeah.
Is that just shooting early morning?
So here's an example. Let me share my screen again. Just let me see if this is what you're talking about. Is it February? Let me think.
And boy, I almost got to some of the sand dunes, and I know Ken Warning wants to get to sand dunes one of these days.
So
yeah, that's one of the shots I think I saw.
Okay. Yeah. So this is Slot Canyon in Death Valley. It's kind of hard to get to. It requires some climbing and scrambling, but it's very similar. So these walls are just almost like a marble.
Yeah.
And this was actually taken, gosh, I don't know. So 3:57. That's Colorado time. So this would have been about 3:00 Death Valley time this past February. So actually, anytime you're dealing with canyons, you want clear blue sky days so you can get the light. And this little chamber back here is bounce light. So there was light hitting this canyon wall around the bend and then bouncing back to light up this wall. And any of the blue that you see is just shadow and blue sky reflecting. So to get that, actually going out around, like canyons kind of go through various stages of light. You can catch this reflected light in the morning as the sun is coming up. Then it kind of takes a break. And then you can actually heading out anywhere between like noon and 3, depending on the type of canyon, you can actually catch this light. So the Zion Narrows is a good example of this. If anyone's ever been to the Narrows, you hike the Virgin River through this giant canyon. And a lot of the photos, the whole premise of this is catching that reflected light. So for instance, if no one's familiar with the Narrows, let me just show you real quick. Forget where it is. So yeah, you're kind of like going after this type of light. And this is reflected light. So we do a workshop in the Narrows where we take people in and we're chasing this light kind of throughout the whole morning, because as the sun gets to its different positions in the sky in the canyon, it's lighting up different areas of the canyon. And this is the same thing. The sun is just hitting a wall out of sight that you can't see directly, but that light is bouncing back and lighting up these little chambers. And it lasts for anywhere between like 20 minutes to a half an hour. Like this one, I think maybe like we spent about half an hour here, and about 10 minutes after the shot, the light had gone and it had traveled up canyon. So we spend our 2 days in there just going to these, locations that we know are photographically pleasing and timing it so we know when that light is. But generally in slot canyons, anytime in like afternoon, noon is generally a good time. You just have to, the canyon also has to be set up right. So you need these kind of like, deeper and more narrow canyons to really appreciate those chambers of light versus like a wider open canyon, like Titus Canyon that you can drive through. That can be a little more challenging just because it's more open and you don't quite get the same corridors that you do. So it just depends on the type of canyon, but 2 good rules of thumb are you just need blue sky days, and generally like afternoon light, you can't go wrong and you'll catch that.
Okay. Yeah, I've never been able to get time. I think it would help if I could come back to a spot a couple of times, and it's hitting it cold and having just a short period of time to do some of that stuff. And I know the last time I was at Death Valley and some of that, it was all overcast, gray days.
That definitely doesn't help.
Was there, which didn't help. It broke up enough for sunset, but then I had the long drive back to Las Vegas, so because that's where I was staying. So that made life interesting, but I do want to get back to those areas someday because it's such gorgeous stuff. It's got to be neat to live out there and be able to get there in shorter periods of time than.
It does help. It definitely helps.
Yeah. But Wisconsin does have some good spots too.
Oh gosh, yeah, the Midwest has a lot of pretty things.
Yeah,
and I think if I were to go back to Illinois now, I've got a deeper appreciation for some of the things that were there that I've seen other people do that I'm like, oh, I just didn't even think of that. So there's beauty everywhere.
Yep. No. So anybody else have any questions? We got one here from Hubert. Where do you camp during the winter time in Death Valley?
So there's a campground in Death Valley. It's in the national park. It's called the Sunset Campground. There's also Texas Spring Campground, and there's Furnace Creek Campground. We usually stay in Sunset, which is across from Furnace Creek where the hotel is and the gas station. It's kind of like a big glorified RV parking lot. But it works for us just because if we have to use our generator on cloudy days for power, we're set up on solar mostly, but like those cloudy days like you witnessed in Death Valley do happen. And to power laptops when we're inside working, sometimes we have to get our generator out. So generators are allowed there, but it's also a good setup for solar panels on sunny days. And you can stay 30 days there at the campgrounds. We're able to spend 2 to 3 months there just because we move around quite a bit, but we also teach for the Death Valley Natural History Association. So when we teach for them, we actually get to move to like the employee camping ground when we're teaching for them. But by moving around to different campgrounds in the park, and we also, our permit lady just informed us a few years ago that we don't actually count the days that we're teaching in the park as days against us. So that's how we're able to stay so long, just because we teach 5 to 6 workshops a season there. So when you add it all up, like it almost adds up to like a whole nother month. But we do like to move around too. And there are other places to like disperse camp around Death Valley that are really nice. We camp on BLM land a lot, especially in areas like Utah. So that helps. But so the only downside is the internet in Death Valley is not great, as anyone knows that's visited. So that can kind of be a challenge just because, aside from being photographers, we do have a lot of emails and business work that we always have to work on. So being connected is kind of important for us. So the internet can be quite a challenge there. And then grocery shopping, your Target isn't just right down the road there. We usually grocery shop in Pahrump, which is an hour away, and we'll do laundry there. So we try to plan our jaunts into the city for about every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So definitely some challenges.
Yeah, that's got to be challenging, and yeah, I bet internet has got to be
Oh,
a big
yeah.
problem. Although maybe the new Skylink stuff that's coming is going to
Yeah,
make it
we'll
easier.
see.
It's just expensive from what I've heard.
Oh, yeah.
I take it shooting in Death Valley, your best times are winter, spring, and fall.
Yeah.
Summer I know gets pretty hot.
Oh, yeah. Summer's very hot. And that can be a challenge too, because there's a fancy word for it, but like when you see kind of the heat diffraction kind of on the landscape, I know summer it gets
Yeah.
really bad. But yeah, we usually spend from December to March out there, and it's a very pleasant time. It does get cold. We didn't have snow on the valley floor, but this winter the snow level got down to about 2,000 feet in the mountains around us, which is pretty rare. But it was in the 30s and 40s in December and January for lows, and then it gets up to like 50s and 60s during the day. February, end of January, you're getting up into the 70s, kind of pushing 80. And by March, you're already pushing like the high 90s. And then it just goes up from there.
Yeah.
So I've never been like April, May in Death Valley. I've never been in the summer. Fall, we'll actually be there in November this year teaching a workshop, and that's our first time being there in November. So we're a little curious to see how that goes. But yeah, I would say the most pleasant time to be there is from December to March. And if you're there at the end of February, beginning of March, and it hasn't gotten ungodly hot yet, like right now, they're having a tiny little wildflower bloom. So there are plenty of flowers in Death Valley. It takes a lot of rain for a super bloom, which unfortunately we didn't have this year. We didn't have quite enough rain. But yeah, that's generally a nice temperate time to go. It's warm enough, especially if you live in the Midwest, it's a nice respite from the snow and cold. But yeah, it's a nice time to be there without roasting.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it can get awfully hot there, and I've been lucky when I've gone. I used to have conferences in Vegas, so it was January, February, March that I was always ending out that way. So yeah, the temperature could be all over the place though.
Yeah.
As well. Any other questions from anybody? It looks like our time is about up anyhow. It's noon, so noon our time. I guess 11 o'clock your time. So I want to thank you for coming and spending an hour with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, everybody.
It was fun, very interesting. It's we're hoping to do more of this type of stuff, so we appreciate you taking the time to come and just to explain some of your photography and that. So
yeah,
we thank you for that.
Well, thank you guys.
So hopefully we'll see you. I've sent out the link to your website. I think most everybody knows about Out of Chicago and their stuff going on. We could try to publicize that as well. So, maybe we can get you a few more people coming to some of your workshops.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me. I love hearing from everyone. So yeah, don't hesitate.
Okay.
All right.
Well, great. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks everybody for showing up. And thanks for an interesting couple of hours. We'll see you next month. I don't know what we'll be talking about next month for the second hour. I'm still working on that. So stay tuned. As you've noticed, I will be sending out emails separately from the Zoom links, just so everybody knows. So it's a little easier to send out information about what we'll be doing in that MailChimp email over the Zoom stuff. So you'll be getting one extra email probably a week before we have our meeting. So send me again if you guys have suggestions for people that we can have on. Send the suggestions to me. I've got a big list, and I'm going to keep going through and trying to find. So thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you next month.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jennifer. Let me just kill something here.